joining. We're going to have a quorum, and we certainly have both of our principal speakers, so we don't want to keep people waiting any longer. We want to welcome all of you back to the Council of the Americas and the America Society. What a privilege it is to have this opportunity, even in the midst of COVID, to come into your living rooms or wherever you're located. But thank you for joining us today for what promises just to be a terrific on-the-record session with the Commander-in-Chief of U.S. Southern Command, Ambassador Craig Fowler, as well as the Deputy Commander and Political Advisor, Ambassador Gene Maines. This session is intended to give the command an opportunity to outreach to the private sector and offer some views in terms of how the command is viewing the region. And then we will have the opportunity for some questions and answers in the second half of the hour. The way that we're going to do the question and answer session this time is that I'll ask those with questions or comments to please send me a private chat. I'll add you to the queue, but based on the ground rules that have been discussed with the command, I'll be asking the questions this morning on your behalf. So please be sure to let me know what those questions actually are so I can do them justice as we raise them with our two principal speakers. I'm not going to do in-depth biographies of either speaker for two reasons. Number one is because if I tried, I would not do them justice because their backgrounds are so incredibly impressive. And number two, we want to begin the program right away and begin to hear from them. But to suffice it to say that those who would be interested in learning about the biographic information, all you have to do is contact us. We'll be happy to get it to you right away. Admiral Craig Fowler is the commander of the U.S. Southern Command. As you know, his immediate past assignment was as the senior military assistant to the U.S. Secretary of Defense. He is a graduate of the U.S. Military Academy and has a postgraduate degree in 1990 from the Naval Postgraduate School in National Security Affairs. He has had positions of increasing responsibility and command responsibility both at sea and on land, as you would imagine, of increasing responsibilities, and has at every level been commended for outstanding service to his troops, those under him, as well as to the United States. So, Commander, it's a real privilege to welcome you to the Council, welcome you back to the Council of the Americas. I should know Ambassador Maines because we've also hosted her. She's the civilian political advisor to the command. She is the meetings has really carved out quite an impressive role as somebody, not just in terms of her day-to-day activities, managing embassies and diplomatic affairs on behalf of the United States that are beginning to come into China, into the Western Hemisphere, including China, and have indeed been doing so for some time. So she's been clear-eyed about these issues and has been somebody, I think, who has really brought those to the attention of the private sector and to others during her time in service. The opportunity today will be to hear again from both of these speakers. They have a short presentation, and then we'll have the opportunity for question and answer session. And one final thing, just to introduce myself, my name is Eric Farnsworth with the Council of the Americas. Delighted to be your host, and I also welcome Susan Siegel, the company representatives, and others. Thank you for joining us. Admiral Fowler, we'll begin the program with you. Thank you again for joining us.
Eric, thank you. It's good to see you, and Susan, thanks as well. And just to note, the Americas Society, Council of Americas does so much to talk about this wonderful neighborhood of ours, this hemisphere, and its importance to the security, to prosperity, to freedom. I do view it as a beacon of freedom, and I think that beacon is under assault, and we're going to talk about that today. Just to take a step and look at what U.S. Southern Command does overall, as one of 6 regional geographic combatant commands in the United States, I report directly to the Secretary of Defense. And to simplify our mission is to defend the United States. So every day we think about what the threats are and what our role is in making the United States safer. The way we do that is principally working with partners, both bilaterally and then through multilateral organizations. And we have some really strong, capable partners in this hemisphere: Brazil, Colombia, Chile, and even as you think into Central America, you look at some of the partners in El Salvador, and while there may be challenges there, the El Salvador military has a company participating in peacekeeping operations in Mali as we speak. So our goal is to work with them to enhance their capabilities in a way that returns the investment to the U.S. And that investment for all of us in a secure, stable, prosperous hemisphere is so important. We have characterized the threats, and all threats are interconnected, but the threats are interconnected in a way that we've characterized as vicious circle. So think about the importance of an institution to a democracy. So U.S. Department of Defense is critical, a strong department. We want to partner with our partner nations in a way that increases their institutional strength and health. Often these young democracies and very young, sometimes weak institutions are under assault from corruption, from transnational criminal organizations, which is a $90 billion a year enterprise that traffics in people, guns, drugs, and other commodities, money laundering, cryptocurrency. 60% of the cryptocurrency in the world is in this hemisphere, and a lot of that is because folks are trying to avoid regular order in the international financial system. So transnational criminal organizations, and then external state actors, a term of art we use in the military to describe the role of nation states like China and Russia. And I can't really consider Iran a nation state, more of a cause than a nation state, and Iran. And then malign actors internal to the hemisphere, such as Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. All that working together to snuff out democracy and freedom in a way that drives the sense of urgency every day with which we get after this idea of sustainable security and defense. Now add COVID to that, and COVID, as it hit the globe, has hit Latin America and the Caribbean hard, the epicenter of the COVID crisis with a higher percentage rate per population. And we are concerned as we watch these trends, what the impacts, the downstream impacts will be on security. And already we see the increase in unemployment, of poverty, of debt, and all those factors that lead us to be concerned about the second and third order impacts as we look at the security going forward. So how do we respond to this vicious circle of threats? It's that partnership, focusing on what we consider basic blocking and tackling of a strong relationship. Education. We have a very robust international military education training program. Think of it as scholarships and grants for school. Our partner nations value our school system, and we value their attendance. It builds lasting partnerships where we really understand each other's thinking and how we view threats, how we view operations, how we think through strategy and planning. Exercising together, working on interoperability, being able to speak to one another in a secure manner, in a digital manner, to share intelligence, to share information. These are the building blocks of our security cooperation relationships. And some of those building blocks are being mirrored by others. We look at the rise of China globally And we look at our own U.S. national defense strategy, which rightly called out competition with China and Russia as the pacing threats for the U.S. military. And that competition, particularly with China, is alive and well right here in this hemisphere, as China is working on port deals, IT deals, infrastructure deals, and military partnerships within hours here of South Florida and the U.S. writ large. We've also focused our efforts on countering these transnational criminal organizations. As I mentioned, a $90 billion a year enterprise. In some cases, in some of our partner nations, these organizations control territory, and they have used COVID to leverage populations in a way that endears themselves to the hearts and minds by trying to substitute for strained social and health systems. Our response has been to step up rather than step down. So in April, we enhanced our operation, added assets, added intelligence, added an all-domain look, which means we're looking at getting after this threat across cyber and information, space, land, air, sea, with our interagency U.S. partners, with our embassy partners, and with our partner nations. And the results have been encouraging. Our interdiction percentage success is up. We're targeting more. Our partners are targeting more. And the criminal enterprises are feeling that and seeing that. And so the goal here, of course, is safer cities in the United States and more stable countries that are less susceptible to this corrosive threat. When we sit down with chiefs of defense, security ministers, police commissioners, the top threats that they cite are these transnational criminal organizations, cyber, and illegal fishing is among the top three. And most of that illegal fishing comes from China. So back to China's corrosive influence in this hemisphere, it is something that has us focused with a sense of urgency day in and day out. I'm going to pass it to Ambassador Maines. She's going to talk about her role in Southcom as our deputy commander and some of the operations and activities that we've been working to counter these threats and make a difference. Ambassador Maines.
Great. Thank you, Ambassador Fowler. Good to see everyone online today. So part of our interaction is obviously with our embassies and the private sector downrange. So at U.S. Southern Command, we in essence have an interagency team here. And that's part of being dual-hatted as the civilian deputy commander and as the foreign policy advisor, is that we have that interagency look, because it can't just be the military. It has to be focused on what are the primary goals for the United States, and then how does the military advance those in partnership with others. So I'll focus quickly on humanitarian assistance. So early in March, U.S. Southern Command really pivoted our humanitarian assistance program, making sure we could get immediate COVID-19 related donations done to key partners. Why does that matter? Because our ambassadors on the ground needed to go out and show U.S. commitment. You want to be partner of choice, you need to be the partner of choice in a crisis. And you need to show up and you need to be ready to commit. And so for us at U.S. Southern Command, we pivoted immediately an existing program to work with our embassies to get stuff rapidly on the ground to show U.S. commitment and presence. And so while it hasn't been covered in the news as much, the U.S. is by far the largest donor to this hemisphere. And we do track that. So we track what the U.S. government, which includes U.S. Southern Command, is contributing to the hemisphere. We track what our adversaries are contributing to the hemisphere. And we watch that very carefully to try to make sure that some countries aren't inadvertently using this moment to take advantage and get in and obtain political leverage. And so it's something we do here in coordination with USAID, with the State Department, with our embassies to make sure that we react quickly and that we get ahead. And so in fact, just recently we were in Jamaica donating medical hospital tents. And there's actually 24 going to the hemisphere. But that's just a series. We've done 330 plus projects in the hemisphere in the last 6 months. And so it really has been a remarkable pace trying to showcase why this hemisphere matters and that the U.S. is a reliable partner. And so we often focus on that, humanitarian assistance. On the China piece, I'll just spend a moment on illegal fishing. It is one of those issues that's a top concern for every country with a coastline. It takes away from the fishing industry, their native fishing industry, and it also decimates communities. So when you have illegal fishing happening off the coast, it means that those local fishermen no longer have a business. What happens when those fishermen no longer have a business? They need to feed their families. So unfortunately, not by choice necessarily, they become fuel runners or supply runners to the drug boats that are right offshore because there are no more fish. And that decimates those communities, and it also makes them more insecure. And so from U.S. Southern Command, Admiral Fowler joined the head of the Coast Guard just a couple weeks ago to launch their global strategic outlook to combat illegal fishing. And it is one about really recognizing international law. China is the big offender in this space with a fishing fleet of over 17,000, highly subsidized. And so you've seen those 300 vessels recently off the coast of the Galapagos Islands, a UNESCO World Heritage Site. We actually track those vessels, and there's unclassified data that we use to do that. And you can see when a ship turns off their navigation device. It's called the AIS system, which is the GPS system for ships. And you can actually see when a vessel, what they call, goes dark. And the only reason to go dark are one of two reasons. You're being attacked by a pirate, or you're doing something illegal. And I think it's clear what's happening off the coast of the Galapagos Islands. Those vessels are now off the coast of Peru, and that's a regular occurrence. That decimates local economies. And particularly now, with the decimation from COVID-19 and the difficulty for economic growth, yet another element of economic growth is being taken off the table by countries who are not recognizing international law. And so the United States will continue to move out on that issue. There's also a big opportunity for the private sector to engage in the traceability issue of the seafood industry. And so I think you'll see that coming online. Companies will be more focused on traceability of seafood, not participating in what is illegal fishing around our hemisphere. And we want to be clear about that. So they're in this hemisphere not because you want to travel this far. They're in this hemisphere because the areas closer to China have already been overfished. And so it's a matter of whether we look at that and we want that for this hemisphere, or we take action now. But the road path to where that leads is pretty clear, as we've seen in other hemispheres. The other part from Southern Command that it gives us the opportunity to do is to coordinate across hemisphere, which I think is increasingly important. So cooperation with Indo-PACOM, with AFRICOM, other combatant commands who are in fact seeing what has happened over decades and that we can learn from so that we get out front of these issues and not always two steps behind. But we're here working with our embassies focused on that. And there's nothing more powerful than the interagency of the United States, but it has to all work together. And I include the private sector in that power. It is probably the single biggest power the US has, and showcasing that power, showcasing what our companies are doing, showcasing the respect for the rule of law, showcasing humanitarian assistance, showcasing all those efforts. There's no more important time for all of us to step out, step up, and be vocal about what it means to respect the rule of law, transparency, and international standards, and why it matters.
That hospital, our visit to Jamaica was an example. We talk about building trust with a partner. Trust is our currency, and you can't surge that. You can't just turn that trust switch on. You build it day in and day out by staying connected. And Jamaica asked for a hospital tent in July, and we delivered it in September. And these are not Boy Scout tents. These are sophisticated tents with filtered air that would kill viruses, with overpressure systems, water systems, diesel generators, electricity, reconfigurable, isolable from 40 to 70 different beds, but all portable and mobile so that a partner could set it up, whether it's a pandemic response or the next natural disaster. That's a tangible example of the kind of things we're working on. Over to you, Eric.
Admiral, thank you very much. Ambassador, thank you very much. I want to reiterate the point that you made about the illegal fishing. We just hosted the ambassador of Ecuador recently for a public session, and she highlighted this as a growing concern, and others around Latin America have as well. So thank you for doing that. I want to remind everybody that if you have a question that you would like to get into the queue, just send me a private chat via Zoom and we'll do what we can to add you to the queue. But we already have several really interesting questions. So I hope both of you are on your A game, because these are good questions, and I know that you've brought it, and I know it's going to be a terrific conversation. The first question has to do with Colombia. And, you know, Council of the Americas has been privileged to host these sorts of sessions with the with the command, for many years. And the truth is, Colombia is generally the top issue that's discussed. And we didn't use the word this morning. I wonder if you can give some thoughts on the peace process and how that's working, and how you're viewing it from the command in terms of what the U.S. should be focusing on in Colombia going forward.
My own opening comments, when we spoke about partner nations stepping up, even though there was a pandemic, to get after those threats that are part of this vicious circle that are strangling peace and prosperity here in the Americas, Colombia was at the top of that list. So despite a pandemic, they ran an international operation, 20 plus partner nations called Orion, and made a significant impact in to the transnational criminal organizations, and continue to do so. We had hosted the President of the United States here in July. He asked me who our best fighters were, who I would want to go to battle with, and without hesitation stated the Colombians. They work hard at their professionalism, and I trust them in a day in and day out basis. And we work hard at that relationship. The peace process has been challenged by the threats that Colombia sees in the neighborhood. So take a look at Venezuela. The Maduro regime, if we can still call it a regime, that Maduro's group of criminals and cronies have wrecked the country to such a point that we now have the largest migration crisis in this hemisphere, and millions have spilled over into Colombia, and Colombians have to respond to that, and they've had to then respond to COVID on the heels of that. And so Colombia has their security team has been stressed by the insecurity in the region, and I think has handled it well given the circumstances. We meet with our Minister of Defense in Chad regularly, and they're committed to the peace process. But without getting into policy, I think it's clear that they were not in line with the approach that the previous administration had taken. So their response has been to put additional pressure on the ELN and FARC dissidents. And I would note that both the ELN and FARC are named terrorist organizations by the U.S. So its threats are significant, and the threats have been fueled by Venezuela. The presence of FARC dissidents and ELN in Venezuela has exploded, really, as they see the opportunity for a safe haven inside Venezuela, and the nexus between all types of illicit activity, Maduro regime, FARC dissidents, and ELN has grown. So I'll ask Ambassador Maines to just share her thoughts on this, but no, we didn't overlook them. We emphasized them broadly as part of that partner stepping up, and thanks for the question, Ambassador.
So on that, sometimes you don't mention the name of your best partner because you think of them every day, every hour of the day. Colombia is definitely in that category. And the stress they're feeling related to Venezuela migration pre-COVID is definitely playing out. And it's playing out in other countries too. The strain that's taking on health systems, on education systems, and also on security systems. So while it looks like the peace process is on a pause. I think that's just because of what is happening overall in the region, and many things are on pause right now as countries try to struggle to get control, to reopen their countries in a safe way. And so we'll see how it goes forward. But they are by far our best partner, and also continue to stand with the United States on counter narcotics and on many other issues where the Colombians play an outsized role in the region, also helping with security in Central America and other countries. And so as countries come out of COVID-19, as we get through this together, as we move to a vaccine phase and distribution phase, you'll start to see other policies come back up where people have had attention focused elsewhere.
Yeah, and I really wanted to give you both a chance to just, highlight those issues. So thank you for doing so. And the follow-on question then is related to Colombia, but it's a broader question as well. And that is, from the command perspective, where do you prioritize human rights in your activities? And again, I know that you've talked about these issues many times over the years, et cetera. But just to give us a sense of going forward, where do human rights issues fall?
Admiral, do you want me to take that one, or you want to go ahead?
Let me start.
Okay.
So the professionalism of a security team and armed forces or police forces, we focus on the militaries, is directly related to this topic. So we talk about what goes into being professionals, and it's adherence to the rule of law, absolute strict adherence to human rights. It's the valuing teamwork, non-commissioned officers, women, peace and security, diversity, inclusion. You lose any of that, you lose your professionalism, but human rights is at the top of that list. And we have a very robust human rights program here at Southcom. Now 20 plus years in the making. We offer training. We offer, and we have not stopped in COVID. Then, in fact, we've figured out that we can expand it with the virtual world. And it comes up in every single conversation with ministers of defense, chiefs of defense, with our embassy teams as we work to work forward a relationship. And our partners are committed to it. Many of our partners will readily admit where they have imperfections. We're working to try to get everybody to as close to perfect as we can, but certainly to a place where we would accept mistakes, but not mistakes that are a result of violations of human rights. And so strong program, vital to what we do, key to moving a relationship forward, and an area of common values and common interests that we share. Ambassador Maines?
So it's absolutely essential for public trust. So the trust that a population puts in their military. And, as the military's been increasingly called upon to engage with public security, I think that's where you see some of those issues. Military are not necessarily trained in crowd control or protest control. That's really not a usual military training exercise. And so in the human rights training, I think countries around the hemisphere recognize it's absolutely essential. And the key is not if you have an incident, we have incidents in the United States. The key is when you have an incident that you have a process and it's transparent. So what do you do when you have an incident? And those are the two real items that we work with countries on. They have programs, steps, but there are incidents. But the key is what you do and how you react to those. But it comes up in every single key leader engagement that we do. Human rights is front and center. It is not negotiable. And we keep pressing on that. And our partners are committed to it because they know that it is what maintains their legitimacy, their trust with the population.
Very good. Thank you again for those comments. A couple of questions on Brazil. The previous Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, spent some time with Brazil and, in fact, I believe suggested that the United States was going to try to revolutionize the relationship with Brazil. And I wonder, from your perspective, how you all see that relationship and how you see it developing, particularly from the defense and security side.
I think we have revolutionized that relationship, and we're taking it to new levels of cooperation in the mill-to-mill realm. Just some highlights. There's a historic relationship with Brazil in the military that dates back to World War II. The geography matters. The Atlantic narrows were prime hunting grounds for German U-boats. Brazil joined World War II in that respect to fight the Germans before the U.S. did. And the historical relationship between the U.S. Fourth Fleet being headquartered out of Natal, Brazil, is not lost on the significance that we have Brazilian officers embedded in our Fourth Fleet today. So we've set out some goals to increase our education exchanges, to increase our personnel exchanges, to increase our involvement in each other's exercises. And we're meeting all those goals, including in a pandemic environment. And it's not all virtual, it's real. Brazil has agreed and will participate in some of our highest end exercises as first evers over the upcoming years. Within months of asking and the Brazilians offering, we embedded one of their sharpest up and coming 2 stars right here in our headquarters as our Deputy Director of Policy and Strategy. We have a Colombian general here in the headquarters as well. So the 2 pillars of our security cooperation in this hemisphere, the 2 pillar nations are Colombia and Brazil. And so I see the relationship moving forward together in a way that is very positive, very much in line with the goals that were laid out by previous Secretary of Defense, the current Secretary of Defense, and the National Defense Strategy.
Ambassador, a comment or no? You're on mute.
Yes, it's not allowing me to unmute myself. So stop muting me. So on Brazil, absolutely agree. There are moments when the stars align and you can really move quickly to pick up agreements that were on pause or establish new agreements, and we're in that phase. And so we're, both sides are trying to take advantage of that to really solidify and move our partnership forward. And you see that across every level. We have an internal process here where every week we actually review our relationships with key partners. And we look at sort of what are those things that are in process that will move that partnership to the next level. And on the Brazil one, it's basically all green on the side of what we're trying to do and how we can strengthen that and meeting those timelines to really have meaningful change in that partnership. So I think we're in a good space with Brazil.
Yeah. And the follow-up to that question then is one that I'm sure you can't necessarily answer, but Ambassador, of course, U.S. has our own elections in November, and without going into that process, what you're doing with Brazil now, would you anticipate that this profile would continue forward? In other words, is it an institutionalization at some level of some of these activities going forward, or is it subject in some ways either to Brazilian or U.S. political currents?
I'll take that. Well, everything, a beautiful thing about democracy is everything we do is based on policy, which derives from politics. And one of the things that I've always enjoyed about the profession of arms in the United States is that we, where I sit here in the Combat Command, we don't do policy, and we're prohibited from participating in politics. So we work very hard at, first and foremost, looking in the mirror every day, making sure we're a team that you would want to partner with. Are we the top of our game in all those things that we should be doing? Education, moral, mental, physical fitness, and then we see how that matches with the partners. And when in conversations with partners, my partner counterparts from democracies, all driven from their constitutions, there's a very similar view there. So as long as the policy permits, and we're in a very good space right now, we will do as much we can to ensure that we can fight together, train together, work together. And the idea there is that when you're stronger together, you'll never have to fight. So I think we're in a very good space for the near term. The relationship goes back. So while we've been able to leverage the current policies to move forward and been tasked to do so, The relationships goes back and there's always been this bilateral mill-to-mill relationship. And we think we can leverage on that going forward with a strong institution here and a strong institution in Brazil. Ambassador, anything to add there?
No, we just keep plowing ahead. I would say, the military is very good at setting those objectives and just keep pushing every week. And that often leads to the military institutions being the strongest or one of the strongest institutions in the country. We need that same strength and consistency across the other key institutions. So our investments in the judicial sector, our investments in anti-corruption, our investments in all of those rule of law elements, so that you have that same, freedom of the press, all the other key institutions that make a democracy a robust democracy. That consistency and attention have to also go on those pillars so that you have that balance of power across the democratic spectrum.
I'm so glad you both brought into the conversation the historic relationship the U.S. has had with Brazil. I mean, the commentary these days is, we newly discovered Brazil or something, but this is going back years, centuries even. So thank you for that good perspective. Let's go to from one difficult question to an easier question, Venezuela. Obviously, I'm saying that with tongue in cheek. Lots of questions about Venezuela. One specific one, and again, this is not the record session, so feel free to answer this how you wish, but the lifeline of Venezuelan gas is really coming from Iran. And Admiral, you mentioned Iran in your opening comments as a malign influence in the region. What can be done about these issues? Should we do something about them? Is there some thing that from the private sector perspective we should be aware of as well? I wonder if you could just help us think through these very real and real-time issues that are complicated.
So we're in support of the U.S. government policy, and the U.S. government policy has been to accelerate to the transition to a legitimate government. And we have frequent dialogue with all the players in the U.S., Special Representative Abrams being one of them, about how to best do that. We do in the military what's called center of gravity analysis. What is key? What is the center of gravity to the Maduro staying in power, to the Chavistas holding on to their ironclad dictatorship grip and ruination of the country? And it really is these external state actors. So it's Cuba. So while they're within the hemisphere, external to Venezuela and the tens of thousands of Cubans that surround Maduro, protect Maduro, control the intel services, and have an economic lifeline to Maduro as well, an interdependent lifeline in many respects. There's Russia, who has had a longstanding relation there, an economic one, but also a military one. And while they're not in the thousands, they are in the hundreds, and they're working day in and day out to really, in many respects, just to undermine U.S. interests or international legitimacy in the problem set. China is active there, large debt leverage, but it goes beyond that. And with the certainty of Russia and China alignment in the UN, there's not been the ability to have a true international unity that would shift this democracy to a legitimate democracy that's for the people. Enter Iran. The Iran relationship is not new, but it has grown in intensity over the last few months. Iran sees an ability and an opportunity to create mischief here in our neighborhood, in this hemisphere, and also an opportunity for both economic and other leverage. And so it's not just oil deliveries, it goes beyond that. The opening of a supermarket chain, mill-to-mill involvement, Quds Force, significantly and alarming from Iran in this hemisphere. So what can be done? I think the U.S. sanctions and the U.S. economic pressure on the regime and on Iran is part of the equation. It's ensuring that in the complex efforts that nation states go to work around those sanctions, that everyone has eyes wide open to what's happening in that world. And the stat of 60% of the world's cryptocurrency is in this hemisphere, is alive and well in the Venezuelan problem set. And so I'm broadening the answer beyond Iran because I think it all fits together like the complex weave of the most intricate Persian rub, all these various factors, which have led to the prolonged agony and the slow shift towards democracy. I get often asked, well, why is it taking so long? Why hasn't the U.S. efforts worked? And I'd say the U.S. efforts have worked. The international effort has worked. Not fast enough for the Venezuelan people, but it took a generation to get to this point. And it's going to take a while to unpack it. Representative Abrams' framework for democracy, democratic transfer is a solid framework that I know is being worked daily. Pastor Maines?
Once that point comes, we are engaged in regular, what is referred to as day after planning. And I refer to it more as decade after planning, because it really is going to be the rebuilding of a country. And that will be led by Venezuelans, that will be done with international partners, but it will be across every sector, not just key institutions like the military or freedom of the press, but you're talking about entire industries that are going to have to be rebuilt. So it really is a decade after planning that will involve, as you mentioned, Eric, the private sector in a big way, not just from the United States, but from Venezuelans and from other international community members when that day comes. And so Southcom is regularly engaged in those planning sessions with the U.S. government as well as our international partners.
Yeah, I want to pick up that point too, because a couple of people have asked questions about the private sector. Ambassador, you just mentioned it. Very much appreciate the segue. And also, Admiral, you've mentioned crypto a couple times with the extraordinary statistic that 60% of the world crypto is from the Western Hemisphere. One of the key threats that you mentioned in the initial presentation, transnational criminal activities, cyber, and fisheries. I want to focus on the cyber for just a second. It's a new day. It's something that probably a lot of folks haven't really focused on, even though it's been ongoing for a bit, as well as the new media environment in the context of social media, which is really causing some new and interesting questions across a region where democracy isn't always, completely secure. In that context, and based on the audience that we have this afternoon, how are you all working with the private sector to try to get at some of these very real security issues, the cyber issues, the social media, recognizing the imperative of free media and democratic process, all of these things? I mean, it's a really complicated environment. How are you thinking these through? And are there ways that from the private sector perspective, we can be partnering for a better outcome for democracy in the region?
Eric, you keep saying these questions are easy. They keep getting harder. Thanks a lot.
I'm just reflecting what people are sending.
That's because we got a really great bunch of thoughtful, smart people here on the line. So I would say we directly work when we work in our bilateral relationships or with some multinational organizations here in the hemisphere for an exercise, for example. We do work a component of public-private interface to that. So I'll use two deployments of the United States Naval Hospital ship Comfort as an example. So as a result of Secretary of Defense Mattis' visit to the region in August of 2018, he ordered Comfort on a short notice deployment to the region to alleviate the stress caused by the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela to the surrounding neighbors' healthcare and social systems. A significant piece of that deployment is private and public partnerships, Doctors Without Borders, and I could go on, the organizations, the Spirit of America, and in terms of donations and people stepping forward, university students and others. And it's just really a true partnership example. We have a team here in our headquarters that works those relations daily. In fact, a couple of them work to set up today's event. They work our public face and private face of Southcom, and have really, I think, in a very thoughtful way, figured out how to leverage that within all the legal constraints that we have to make a difference. Sometimes we can use our logistics or access footprint to help private industry deliver important humanitarian assistance that they otherwise wouldn't think of. We're currently working with the Colombian Rehabilitation Hospital, which is at capacity for their soldiers that get wounded in the field in the line of duty, and working some public-private ways to help strengthen where I can't do it, but others could. That is a real tangible way to get after threats, because we are strengthening institutions, which is the best way. Second, comfort deployment, same story, robust support from private industry and public institutions across the hemisphere. We're going to do another comfort deployment next year. We're planning for it. We're going to put out another call for support through our headquarters. So for those that are plugged in today, jot that down if it fits in terms of what your organization can offer. The cyber piece of this is more by, with, and through United States Cyber Command. So while we are a geographic combatant commander, we have functional combatant commanders. They are the lead. We have a framework for prioritization and a framework to work with our partner nations on that. We also have worked with the IADC and recently hosted a week-long cyber conference where we were a co-host along with Office of Secretary of Defense Cyber and talked about ways, it was all public, but talked about ways to enhance cybersecurity, since cybersecurity is so much a place, as you pointed out, Eric, where public and private really blend, and where the authorities differ by nation. It's complex enough here in the U.S. what the role of Homeland Security is versus the Department of Defense, and it's equally complex in our partner nations. We have a team here at our headquarters that focuses on this, both for internal defense and to help our partners with their defense, and we deploy those teams. And we also have teams that come to us from Cybercom, and we deploy those teams, same types of activities. We also have offensive teams to do the things you would think we might be doing at a level we can't talk about in that realm. And in some respects, that blends over to what you talked about in information, because much of the cyber, when we think of cyber, the backbone of the systems, it's the information that's sent on those that is being used or misused or stolen or replicated or all of the above in ways that undermine business and undermine security. I noted up front China's role and what China has done globally. And I say the threats from Chinese industry and Chinese intrusion into this realm are real and they are alarming. And I say to partners, look, I'm not asking you to choose who you're going to partner with, but when you go so far in a partnership with China, you will ensure that it's not a backdoor, that it's an open pipe to Beijing, and then at some point our ability to have a trusted relationship, which is key to everything we do, will be jeopardized. Pastor Maines?
So on cyber, as Admiral Fowler pointed out earlier, it is in the top 3 for every single chief of defense, minister of security on the area they need assistance with. And every country is at a different place, as you might expect. And so some countries, if you look on a scale of 1 to 10 and where countries are on cybersecurity, some countries are really at a 2 and some countries maybe at a 7 or an 8. And so a lot of it is just leveling the playing field, leveling the knowledge base of what do you even mean by cyber? What are you actually looking for? And then that helps direct you to who's the best to partner with that. If it's things, that we're looking at in terms of the high-end stuff, that's a different conversation. If it's basically in the 2, 3, 4 category, 5, 6, there's a lot of partnerships that are happening with the private sector that can work those relationships directly with host governments and get people up to speed on that. But it is a conversation. People raise it. People know they should be working in it. It just depends on the sophistication level and the investment level that countries have chosen to make in this ever-evolving field. And so that gets into the partnership theme that Admiral Fowler was talking about. As we get into the year ahead, this is a critical year in this hemisphere, no doubt about it. You have devastated economies, devastated budgets, unemployment's high, and how we all respond collectively to that will determine the future of this hemisphere. So it's got to be all in. And by all in, that means, aggressively looking at the relocation of supply chains, everything from pharmaceuticals to fish processing, since we were talking about illegal fishing. There's a whole range of things that could and should be relocated to this hemisphere. It's about finding the right countries with the right environment and getting countries to step up and say, hey, come to my country. It's going to be a difficult moment, but that doesn't mean they're not opportunities. But over the next 6, 9, 12 months, it's got to be an all-in from the U.S. government, from the private sector, from the NGOs to get through and stabilize the region during this critical period.
Yeah, these are tough questions, I acknowledge, but you all are giving unbelievably fine answers, so thank you. These are really impressive responses and really clarifying and putting them in just a really helpful framework for us to think about. Our time is not unlimited, unfortunately, but we do have a couple additional questions I'd like to get to. If we can move up from South America a little bit further north to Central America. This is where I started my career in the State Department way back in 1990. Ambassador Maines, I think I beat you by a couple of years, but we're contemporaries. But Central America has had an outsized role in U.S. foreign policy toward the Western Hemisphere. Things there remain challenging, not just in the 3 countries of the northern part of the isthmus, but indeed the entire isthmus. And I wonder how you all are thinking about some of those issues. Nicaragua has kind of been taken out and put in a different category, but clearly geographically it's still very important in terms of the relationship with Costa Rica, Honduras, et cetera. So, I mean, you all know that, but how should we be thinking about Central America? More importantly, how are you thinking about Central America during this time?
First of all, thinking of them individually, because as you unpack that, each country has unique challenges, and then there's the challenge that you would from transnational criminal organizations that encompasses all of them. The nexus between what's going on in Venezuela and Central America is also an area that we were focused on. The significant increase in narco trafficking up through the Caribbean, as opposed to a few years ago, that is targeted into Honduras and Guatemala is a real key area of our focus. And how do we work through our Joint Interagency Task Force South, which is the tactical command that works for me. When I say tactical, that's day in and day out in this counter-transnational criminal organization fight. And you've got 20 plus partner nations and every agency in the U.S. government at that command. We have Mexico at the command, Netherlands at the command, Canada, Dutch, French, all working together on our shared interests of the problem set. And a lot of that shared interest is focused at Central America. We are really also focused with State Department, since the key is to sustainable security here is getting after the economic factors that really undermine much of the reason why people migrate, much of the reason why people choose to a different form of economic livelihood illegally, why they seek corruption, and COVID is another aspect now as we work to same sorts of humanitarian assistance that Ambassador Maines mentioned. Overall, we're very focused on, and our top projects and numbers of projects out of the long list of projects are right here in the region you spoke of, Guatemala, Honduras, to name a few. So that would be just a few of the points, Ambassador Maines.
So on Central America, we watch it very closely, particularly in terms of the lowering of remittances, which has an increased economic effect, the lowering of economics across the hemisphere, and the direct relation that has on migration. When ports are closed or borders are closed, migration goes down, just like with narco trafficking. Narco trafficking has gone down. The narco traffickers have been stockpiling. Once borders open, travel becomes more clear. The same will happen with migration. I think that's just a natural occurrence that's going to happen across a range of industries as the flow of people begins to pick up. It is so important that we invest in the institutions that lead to stabilization of a country. So again, the rule of law, the judicial systems, freedom of the press, all of those things take on critical importance so that people have confidence in their own country, that they see their future in their own country. When you get to the point where somebody makes a decision to migrate, the battle is really over because they've already gone through a long thought process about whether they're going to migrate, take their family with them. That battle is really not at that border. That battle was lost probably 9 months, a year and a half ago, when that person didn't see a future in their own country. And so getting at those root economic causes, root security causes are really where the front line is for many of these issues that end up at the border. And that's an ongoing interagency effort, private sector effort, NGO effort, where everybody has a critical role to play.
Just point out as an example of the significance that we place on this key area, the only visit we've had here at headquarters in the COVID environment, because it has to be managed so tightly with all the health protection guidance, has been the Honduran Chief of Defense and his entire joint team. And our first multi-day trip in COVID will be later this month, and it will be to 4 of the Central American countries that we'll visit over a week's time, and we'll do so very methodically so we can stay in our own force health protection bubble as we do that. But absolutely important that we have these interactions to better understand how we can partner and come up with sustainable security. Great question. Thank you.
I know your time is limited, but I want to see if we can sneak in another 2 quick ones. The answer, I mean, it's not fair because the answers are much longer than we have time, but just really to sensitize you that these are questions that people are wanting to ask. The first is, we're in the midst of hurricane season. You all have talked about humanitarian relief. The question being, how concerned are you, in particular your dialogues with some of the island countries of the Caribbean basin in terms of some global climate change issues, that these humanitarian issues are going to become more and more pronounced in your area of responsibility? That's the first one. And then the second one is really a choice of 2 that we'd ask you to choose. There have been 2 questions, one each about the defense relationship with Guyana and one about the defense relationship with Argentina. Obviously, 2 totally different questions. Give you the choice to answer which one you care to, and we'll take the other one under advisement for the next time we meet. But sounds perhaps like a humanitarian question first.
That sounds like 3 questions, Eric.
It is. I'm trying to sharpshoot you.
You said 2 quick ones and 3. I don't know that I want to sell my car to you or buy one from you. Hey, so on humanitarian assistance response, so one of the fundamental missions we have is to be able to rapidly respond in concert with the U.S. government. And we work that hard. We practice that. We rehearse that. We run seminars on that. And in preparation for this year's hurricane season, using this same virtual venue, we had our largest ever exercise. And we actually asked the CARICOM organization to run the scenario, and then we all talked through what we would do. 20-some nations, every organization you can imagine, and how we would respond. We came up with a list of action items. How do you do this in a COVID environment? And how do you do this more broadly and sustainable way going forward, recognizing that no one nation, even the United States, has enough capability to respond to these kinds of disasters. So whatever the frequency is on disasters, and there's science to suggest that it's frequent and it's severe, we need to be ready, and we need to be ready in concert with our partners. And we spend a lot of time on that with our exercise program, our education program, and our interactions. And we've done repeat sessions in the virtual world to stay plugged in. On Guyana, certainly an opportunity as we reset that relationship with a new government. We look at significant oil reserves and the U.S. investment in those reserves. We look at the disputed border with Venezuela. We look at other nation-state interests in Guyana, and we have a plan and agreed bilateral objectives, and working towards those is one of our key opportunity partners. Argentina, we have a longstanding relationship with Argentina. We have one of their officers here in our headquarters. We continue our mill-to-mill exchanges, and we have had since COVID virtual engagements. And again, as I stated before, we respond to policy changes, we change the relation, but it's a key geographic location and a key partner. And we continue to invest in Argentina for the future. Anything to add to that rapid fire response, Ambassador Maines?
So on Guyana, it's a critical next 2, 5, 10 years as they have economic changes. And so whether the really new economic realities transition into in-depth institutions, improved education, improved healthcare systems, rule of law, transparency, that's all institutional development and things that are going to be critical for that country going forward. Or will it be another country that somebody just comes, siphons off their resources and that country doesn't go up? We've seen that play out too. So, our money is on the former, that Guyana is going to use those resources to really become one of the most stable countries in this hemisphere and going to lead the way. And so looking at how you do that, how you build those structures over time. For Argentina, I'll just highlight, when you talk about illegal fishing, it is one of those issues that unites the region. And so every country with a coastline is facing this issue. So even when you may have disputes over something, if you come back to what unites you, you can make a lot of progress. And that's one that we're going to pursue. And that's one that countries have come to the table along with cybersecurity, along with others, with counter narcotics, on what they see as important. And if it's important to a partner, it's important to us.
I think that's a terrific way to wrap up our session. You all have been extraordinary in terms of your patience with the questions we've thrown at you, in terms of the transparency of your responses, the generosity of your time. And I mean this sincerely, thank you. But also, if I can say, Admiral and Ambassador, thank you for your service to our country. That's not always appreciated these days, but we appreciate your service. And I just wanted to thank you on behalf of the Council of the Americas and our membership for what you're doing for the United States. So thank you for that. We hope you can come back at some point and give us an update on some of these issues. Meantime, those who are interested in hearing directly from the new president of the Dominican Republic, Luis Abinadir, we'll be hosting him on Wednesday. So be sure, please, to tune in for that. And we have also a lot of other exciting things upcoming very, very soon. So please stay tapped in with the Council of the Americas. With that, let me acknowledge again Susan Siegel, the President and CEO, who has sat through very patiently listening and probably had a lot of questions, which I didn't entertain. So my job is on the line. But Susan, thank you for joining us, and all our board members, et cetera, et cetera. This will conclude our program. Thank you again, everybody. Be well.